On the morning of July 23, 1995, in the quiet town of Midway, Arkansas, two 17-year-old best friends, Steve Hannes and Jason Kelly, asked Steve's mom to drop them off at the lake for a day of fishing. By evening, Steve's mom arrived to pick them up, but they were nowhere to be found. The next day, one of the boys was discovered wandering along a deserted highway, an impossible distance away, 1,379 miles from where they had been fishing. What he told the authorities was nothing short of bizarre, and it haunted those who heard it. "I can't believe I'm here," he began, his voice trembling. "I still have a hard time believing what happened to me, and to Steve." Steve's mom dropped us off at the lake around 7 a.m. We tried to get there earlier, but I had trouble waking up. Now, I wish I'd slept in. When we finally got out of the van and saw the lake, it was like glass. The water was eerily still, reflecting the blue sky perfectly. We exchanged glances. I told Steve, "It's going to be a good day for fishing." He nodded, as if agreeing with an unspoken truth between us. We've fished this lake countless times. We knew exactly where to start, a spot where we'd always caught plenty of crappie. We waved to Steve's mom as she drove off, the engine humming as the van disappeared down the dirt road. Our plan was simple: fish all day, eat the food we brought, and let her pick us up when the sun began to dip. No specific time, just a casual day of fishing. We set up at our usual spot, casting our lines into the water, but hours passed with nothing more than a few small catches. "Let's try moving around the lake," Steve suggested, his eyes scanning the water. "Maybe the fish are hiding in different spots today." I grabbed my gear and followed him along the bank. Every 15 to 20 feet, we'd stop, cast our lines, and wait. But after a while, it felt like we were just going through the motions. The water remained still, as if it too had grown tired of us. As we neared the far side of the lake, where dense trees and thick bushes began to edge the shore, I noticed something odd. A beat-up green and white camping trailer stood among the trees. It looked out of place, like it had been abandoned long ago. "Hey, look at that," I whispered. "We've been coming here for years and I've never seen a trailer parked here before." Steve squinted, his gaze fixed on the strange sight.
"Yeah,
that's weird. We come here all the time. How did it even get here?" We stepped closer, but the unease in the pit of my stomach grew stronger. "Look," Steve said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "there are no tire tracks, no marks in the dirt. How did it get here? This place is surrounded by trees. It shouldn't be possible." I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. There was something wrong with the entire scene, the trailer, the silence, the heavy air pressing down on us. I glanced at Steve, and I could see he felt it too. "Let's go check it out," Steve suggested, his voice almost too calm. "No way," I replied, unease bubbling up in my chest. "Let's just go back to fishing." "Come on," he insisted, a playful grin creeping onto his face. "We'll just take a quick look. If it's locked, we'll turn around and go back." Against my better judgment, I followed him as he led the way, my feet reluctant on the path through the thick brush. The further we walked, the denser the forest became, and the sound of buzzing mosquitoes filled the air, their relentless biting reminding me of how far off the beaten path we were. We were just a few yards away from the trailer when Steve turned to me, his face pale, eyes wide with something unreadable. "I'm gonna check the door. Stay here." I nodded, unable to speak, my heart hammering in my chest as I watched him slowly approach the trailer. Just as his fingers hovered over the door handle, the air around us seemed to shift. From inside the trailer, we heard a noise, a thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, moving fast, as if rushing toward the door. Without warning, Steve jerked back, and we both turned to run. The door creaked open, the sound echoing through the trees. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end as the heavy footsteps grew louder, chasing us with an unnatural speed. Branches scraped against my face, and the sting of leaves and twigs clawed at my eyes. It was hard to see, everything blurred by tears and fear. I could hear Steve's frantic shouts, but I couldn't make out his words. I had no idea where I was heading, but I was running deeper into the forest, away from the lake, away from safety. After what felt like an eternity of stumbling and running, I finally stopped, gasping for breath. I hid behind a large tree, my chest heaving. My mind screamed at me to run further, but my body couldn't keep up. That's when it hit me. A sharp, sudden blow to the back of my head. I crumpled to the ground, darkness swallowing me whole. When I woke, everything was pitch black. The air was thick and stale, the dust clinging to my skin. I tried moving my arms and legs, but they were bound. Panic surged through me as I realized the space I was in was too small, too cramped, and it was unbearably hot. Sweat soaked my skin. I tried calling out, but the silence swallowed my voice, the sound barely escaping the confines of my throat. The suffocating darkness wrapped around me like a shroud, and I couldn't stop the spiraling thoughts of terror. Why was I here? Who did this? Where was Steve? Suddenly, the trailer, this forsaken place, shuddered. It groaned under some invisible weight, a low, mechanical hum filling the air. My heart pounded in my chest, and fear twisted like a knife in my gut. How could the trailer be moving? I had seen the area. There was no way out. The hum grew louder, then abruptly cut off. Silence. Then, I heard something that made my blood run cold, struggling. A loud thud. My thoughts spiraled. Was that Steve? Was that sound his? My heart raced faster as I struggled harder against my restraints, but the more I tried, the more hopeless it seemed. And then, as if from nowhere, a hand gripped my hair, pulling me out of my confined space and dragging me across the floor. When they stopped, I didn't dare move. I couldn't. I was too terrified. It took my eyes a moment to adjust, but when they did, what I saw made my blood freeze. Steve. His body, lifeless and headless, hung from an upside-down cross. His severed head sat just below his body, his expression frozen in a grotesque grimace, like a man who had endured an eternity of pain. I closed my eyes and prayed it was a nightmare. But it wasn't. A few minutes later, I opened my eyes, expecting to see Steve's head and lifeless body still hanging there. But instead, I was greeted by something far more horrifying. Standing before me was a man, or something that resembled a man. He loomed over me, glaring with eyes I will never forget. The whites of his eyes seemed unnaturally bright, glowing with a malevolent intensity. He was barefoot, wearing only tattered black pants. His entire body, from his neck down, was smeared with black paint, glistening as if freshly applied. Etched into the paint on his chest and stomach were grotesque symbols, carved with trembling fingers. The most prominent was an upside-down cross that stretched from his chest to his abdomen. Below it, scrawled across his stomach, was the word Malfeas. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He simply stared at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. With terrifying ease, the man grabbed me by the arm and hoisted me off the floor. Before I could even react, he slammed me onto a wooden table in front of Steve's mutilated body. My breath caught in my throat as I found myself face to face with Steve's decapitated head, mere inches away from mine. I fought to keep from screaming, the metallic stench of blood and decay making me gag. The man moved behind me, and I could hear him rummaging through what sounded like old tools. The clinking and scraping filled the suffocating silence. Minutes felt like hours. Then, he returned, his presence looming over me like a storm cloud. In one hand, he held a sickle. The curved blade caught the dim light, glinting menacingly. With both arms raised high, he began chanting in a guttural, ancient tongue I couldn't understand. His voice echoed through the confined space, each word dripping with malice. I closed my eyes, trembling. This is it, I thought. This is how I die. As I braced myself for the end, a new sound pierced the air, a deep, hoarse voice. It was low and otherworldly, speaking in the same incomprehensible language as the man. I opened my eyes and immediately wished I hadn't. Behind the painted man stood a monstrous figure, half human, half beast. Its body was covered in thick, black hair, and it stood on two legs like a man. But its glowing red eyes and grotesque form were far from human. Its face. I can't describe it. I've tried to recall it in my nightmares, but my mind refuses to piece it together. The beast locked its fiery gaze on me, its presence radiating pure, unbridled evil. The painted man, now nodding fervently, seemed to acknowledge the creature's presence. Without warning, the beast let out a guttural growl before transforming into a massive black bird. Its wings spread wide, and with a deafening screech, it vanished into the darkness. The man slowly lowered his arms, his expression unreadable. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows where he'd found the sickle. For a moment, I lay there, paralyzed by fear. Then, he returned. Grabbing me by the hair, he yanked me off the table and threw me to the ground. Pain surged through my body as I hit the cold, hard floor. I squeezed my eyes shut, preparing for death once more. But instead of killing me, he began cutting the bindings around my wrists and ankles. The rope fell away, and I lay sprawled on the floor, too terrified to move. Before I could gather my thoughts, he seized me again, dragging me by my hair toward the trailer's door. With his free hand, he flung the door open and hauled me outside, throwing me onto the ground. I scrambled to face him, crawling backward as he stood over me. "You are not what the master is looking for," he said, his voice hollow and devoid of emotion. "Why are you doing this?" I yelled, my voice breaking. His piercing eyes bore into mine, and for a moment, I thought he might change his mind. "I am the hand of the dark god," he said. "I am the dark messiah. I am the vengeful one." Without another word, he turned and walked back into the trailer, slamming the door behind him. I didn't wait. Ignoring the pain in my legs and the numbness in my feet, I stumbled away as fast as I could. My heart pounded as I glanced over my shoulder, expecting him to follow. But what I saw stopped me in my tracks. The trailer was gone. It had vanished without a trace. I stood there, surrounded by unfamiliar terrain. It was then I realized I was in the middle of a desert, though I'd never been to one before. The endless expanse of sand stretched out before me, surreal and disorienting. With no sense of direction, I walked. My legs felt like lead, and exhaustion gnawed at my bones. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a highway. Too tired to go any further, I collapsed in the middle of the road. That's where a passing car found me. The couple who stopped to help said I was trembling uncontrollably, my eyes wide with shock. The first thing I asked them was, "What state am I in?" They took me to the nearest police station in Bullhead City, Arizona, where my parents were contacted. When my parents arrived the next day, I told them everything. The same story I told the authorities. Unbelievable as it sounded, there was no other explanation for how I had traveled over 1,000 miles in less than a day. There were no records of any flights, and no one could figure out how I had ended up in the desert. Steve was never found. A search team traced my steps back to the trailer's supposed location, but all they found were faint footprints and the imprints of 4 tires in the dirt. There were no tracks leading to or from that spot. It was as if the trailer had simply materialized out of thin air. Steve was eventually declared dead, though his body was never recovered. As for me, I've never been the same. Over time, I withdrew from the world, refusing to speak about what happened. The rumors say I've spent years searching for that green and white camping trailer, hoping to find answers. Or perhaps, hoping to find Steve.